Thank you very much. So yes, thank you, Dr. Marchand, for inviting me to give this talk to you guys. I apologize in advance if I beep up here. I'm wearing 2 hats today. I'm also on call at the hospital, so I have 3 pagers in my pocket. And as he mentioned, I am going to talk about clinical trials. We're going to start talking about first a basic principle of what the different phases are and what you would expect if you were to enroll in a clinical trial. And then we'll also cover the opportunities here at Sylvester. And being in Dr. Marchand's clinic for the last 2 years really now, I've seen the development of these trials and how many we have. And putting this lecture together really also showed me that, here at Sylvester we have abundant opportunities for our kidney cancer patients to join trials in all stages of their where they are in their disease. So let's get started. Okay, so clinical trials, why we do them. The goal is to discover new ways of treating cancer, diagnosing, prevention, expanding the treatment opportunities and options that we have today. Prior to any approval of any new medication, it has to go through 3 phases of a clinical trial. I predominantly have been working in the phase 1 area, but we see patients in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And all of these different stages of the trials answer different questions for us. So a phase 1 clinical trial is done, essentially this is the first time that a drug is used in a human population. So that medication may have seen promise in animal models or in the laboratory, and this is the first time that we're taking it and using it in people. So the primary goals of those trials are to determine safety, to determine the dose that patients can tolerate. And in doing that, we're collecting evidence. So even if the goal is safety and dose, we're collecting evidence on efficacy as well. So we're seeing if these new medications are working and doing what we expect them to do. Once a new drug passes phase 1, it goes into phase 2 trials. And phase 2 is where we further assess efficacy. So now we know the drug is safe. We know a dose that we should likely be using. And now we're looking at, is it working? Is it doing exactly what we expect it to do? Again, we get some of that data from a phase 1 trial as well, but we get larger samples of patients, larger numbers of patients to further assess that in phase 2. Once you pass phase 2, and this gets a little murky because more and more, especially in cancer patients, and the more and more new drugs that we develop, medicines are actually getting approved after phase 2, because if you have enough patients and you see that the drug is working enough, FDA will start to say, okay, you can start to use this drug in cancer patients, in the general population. But most of the time it goes on to phase 3, and phase 3 is where you have large sample sizes of patients. It's usually multi-center, so whereas phase 1 and phase 2 may be focused to one center, in the United States, phase 3 is often involving multiple centers working together. We enroll patients in the hundreds to even thousands at times, and it's looking at the new medication versus what we have in current standard of care. So to touch a little bit more on what each of these mean, phase 1, as we mentioned, is the new drug straight from the beginning stages. It is the first time we're using it in human patients. It tends to be smaller sample sizes, so this tends to be, we enroll a few patients, we look at all of the dose, the toxicities. If it passes that level of not being toxic, not causing a lot of adverse side effects, we enroll more patients. So it tends to be smaller sizes. It often is at a single center, so it's often, if it's at Sylvester, it'll be here, sometimes a couple. And this is, every patient's going to get the study drug. So in these studies, there's no placebos, there's no, am I getting the drug, am I not getting the drug? All patients do. Phase 2, as I mentioned, is larger sample sizes. So this is usually somewhere in the realm of 25 to 100 patients. We often test new medications in multiple cancer types. So we may think it's going to work well in, for example, kidney cancer, but we'll also we'll test it in multiple types of cancer. It again is sometimes the drug alone, sometimes in phase 2 trial it can be in combination with another study drug, in combination with something that's already approved and on the market to be used in your type of cancer. And again, the goal is to collect data about how it works. And again, it's no placebo. Everybody in a phase 2 trial will get the medication. Phase 3, now we get into what we call, you may have heard of randomization. Randomization is essentially where essentially you get randomized. We don't have control, you don't have control into either getting the study drug or getting standard of care or whatever we're testing the study drug against. We try to do studies that are double-blinded, meaning that we as the investigators don't know, you as the patients don't know, and we just collect data on how you're doing, how your cancer is being treated, what your side effects are. And as I said, this is often in multiple sites across the country. Okay, so now for you guys deciding what to do and to be in a clinical trial, there are certain questions you should be asking yourself and your physician. What is a trial, as we just explained? How long would you be enrolled in the trial? What might you experience if you take this study medication? How does it work? If it's going to work, what the insurance costs? We get that question all the time. How much of the study is going to be covered by your insurance company and how much is going to be covered under the study? Do you have to travel for it? Are you willing to travel for it? And you should always be asking your physician as well of what your trial options are and then what your standard of care options are. Just to touch on risks, because I think that's important too. We value trials. We think that they're an excellent way to move the needle forward, but you also, as the patient, have to ask, what are the risks of me doing this? And those may include, obviously these are novel medications, so we're not sure entirely of what all of the risks you may experience. We gather that information by the more and more patients we enroll. The further we're into a study, the more information we have available, and we can speak to the experiences of our patients. But everyone's different, and we have to collect that data as we go. It's a time commitment. Being on a trial, you do have to come to the clinic multiple times, depending on the protocol you're in. Sometimes that's weekly, sometimes that's every 3 weeks. It depends on what study you're in, so there is a time commitment. You do have to have insurance. Usually how that works, every protocol is a little different, but generally the study covers the study-related costs, and then the insurance will cover anything that's standard of care, so anything above and beyond the need of the trial. Questions to think about is transitioning the study drug to market, so that's more when you get to the phase 3. We do close studies, and they become either FDA approved, not FDA approved, and how that process works. And then many people have concerns about not being randomized to the drug when they're on the phase 3. With that, we will, on any study you go on, you're monitored very, very closely. And we do serial imaging. We look at how you're responding, both clinically and on our imaging. And if there's any indication that the study is not working for you, you're taken off it quickly and transitioned to something else. And then, studies we're pretty good at enrolling older patients, but sometimes studies cherry pick people. You have to have a very good performance status to participate. So you may ask, how is this going to apply to other people? And then again, length. These studies can go on for long periods of time. I wanted to touch on informed consent and what that means. So whenever you're making the decision to join a clinical trial, one thing that we have to give you is the informed consent. This is essentially where you have a meeting with us. We provide to you the documentation that has essentially what the study is, what the medication is, and it gives you all of those things I was detailing before. It talks about what procedures are going to be required of you in terms of labs, imaging, possibly repeating biopsies. It touches on how frequently you're going to have to come to the clinic to see us. It touches on, the risks and the benefits. You should also, during this time, ask about other treatment options. Essentially, usually what we do is we send you home with the informed consent, and then we bring you back to another visit after you've had the opportunity to read it, review it with your family, talk about it, and then come back, ask any questions that you have of us. And if you would like to move forward, we move to the next step, which is the general process. So how this works, if you're ever interested after this talk of going into a clinical trial, and I see some familiar faces in the audience as well who are on studies with us currently, feel free to talk about your experiences in a break if you're comfortable. But essentially what happens is, if you're interested, your primary medical oncologist can refer you to be seen in our experimental therapeutics clinic if there's a good trial in mind for you. We have that initial visit. During that initial visit, we talk about your history, what treatments you've gone through already. We provide you with the informed consent and the information so that you can go home and think about it. And then we bring you back. We bring you back for a second visit. During that time, any questions you may have, we go over. And then if you decide to proceed, and if we as a team decide to proceed, we sign the consent during that visit. Then you enter into what is called the screening process. And the screening process is in every single trial. And that is the process where we see if you are an eligible candidate for that trial that we're thinking of. So this is generally a 28-day period of time that's allotted for you to get all the tests done. It usually entails a physical exam and a history from us, labs, whatever's required within the study, imaging, again, whatever required in the study. Sometimes some studies require a repeat biopsy of a tumor that we're going to monitor during the study. So whatever needs done during that process gets done in that 28-day period. If everything goes according to plan and you show that you are a good candidate for the trial, then you enter into the enrollment. And then you, depending on how the protocol of the trial is, will get enrolled into the study and start. And then after that, it goes, again, based on protocol of how frequently you will have to come to the clinic and see us. Okay, so how to find. This is an important slide, take notes. One of the major places to look for any trial across the United States or anywhere is clinicaltrials.gov. You can go to this website, you can type in your tumor type, and it will give you trials that are all over. And then specifically here at University of Miami, you can go to umiami.health.org/Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Clinical Trials. And you can actually look by disease site and phase even of what trials we have available here. Okay, so now moving into what we have here, which there are several. All right, so we have them, like I said at the beginning of this, we have them at any stage that you may be at. So we have trials that are in the preoperative setting, so before you even have any operation. We have them on the first line, metastatic. We also have second, third line, and above, so multiple treatments in the metastatic setting are spread. So this trial, we're going to touch on each trial a little bit so you have an idea. I gave you the NCT number. There is an identifying number that you can literally Google that number, and it will give you the clinical trial on clinicaltrials.gov. So this is a phase 3 trial study, a randomized study comparing perioperative nivolumab versus observation in patients with renal carcinoma undergoing a nephrectomy, or the PROSPER trial. So this is a phase 3 trial. This is the furthest up, as we talked about. And so it's a multi-center study. And what this trial is doing is it's randomizing patients who are surgery eligible patients. So if the planned treatment is a nephrectomy or a partial nephrectomy, the patients are randomized to either receive the surgery and then observation alone, or they're randomized to receive 1 to 2 cycles of nivolumab, which we'll talk a little bit about as we go, and you may be familiar with it as well. It's a monoclonal antibody against PD-L1, so it's a immunotherapy that's used to treat many cancers now. And so you're either randomized to receive that medication up front, followed by your surgery, followed by remaining on that medication, and you're monitored closely for progression or toxicity or what have you. So the primary outcomes that they're looking for is recurrence-free survival. So what that means is to see if giving the nivolumab versus observation alone, which is the previous standard of care, reduces the risk of recurrence. And they're assessing that up to 10 years. And then their secondary measure is overall survival. So what that means is overall survival of our patients who, from time to randomization to death by any cause. And we look at overall survival in pretty much all of the studies we do. Okay, so just to give you an idea, if you're interested, this is again a study that is going to be earlier stage. So these are patients who are eligible for the surgery. either the radical or the partial nephrectomy. They cannot have any distant metastatic disease. There can be or single lesions that are spread as long as they're treatable, and they can be treated by a surgery, for example. You have to confirm renal cell cancer and no prior treatments. And again, in all studies, it'll be reiterating you have to have what I mean by good performance status is going to the grocery store on your own, taking care of all of your life, still engaging in your normal life activities despite your diagnosis of cancer. Okay, so first line treatment in metastatic disease. So first line meaning you haven't received any prior treatments, and metastatic again meaning that it has spread to other parts of the body outside of just the kidney. So this is another phase 3 trial. It's a randomized open label study to compare this study drug, NKTR-214, combined with nivolumab, same medication before, to the investigator's choice of sunitinib or cabozantinib in patients with previously untreated advanced renal cell cancer. So what that means is essentially they're randomizing patients to get the study drug with the immunotherapy medication, nivolumab, versus our current standard of care, some of our current standard of care, which is these tyrosine kinase inhibitors, which are oral medications, sunitinib and cabozantinib. So these medications, the investigator can choose which of those two medications they think would be better to treat your cancer. So it's run by our Dr. Sharma, who I believe already spoke to you guys earlier today. She's the primary investigator. And like I said, it's a phase 3 study. What is the study drug? So the study drug is this NKTR-214. It's against this protein CD122 agonist. So what that means is it is believed to stimulate the patient's own immune system to fight the cancer. So essentially what it does is it helps promote proliferation of your immune-fighting cells, which are called T cells. And so the idea is that these two medicines would work synergistically together, because one medicine is going to help promote the proliferation of those immune-fighting cells, and then nivolumab takes the brakes off the immune system and allows those cells to come to the cancer to fight. So the idea is a synergistic immune fight of the cancer. Again, just to touch on the primary outcomes, we're going to look at how patients are responding and how they're surviving. And then progression-free survival, which means that what that means is we're looking at how long can we keep you on these medicines before the disease starts to get worse again. So again, just as an idea, the performance status, that's going to be on all of them. You have to have measurable disease so that we can follow it on the imaging. And again, confirmed metastatic disease and no prior therapy. And then I gave you the link down there as well of how you can find this trial. So second line and beyond. So this is a trial I've seen several patients on with Dr. Mershon. The study drug is called PT2977, and this is in combination with cabozantinib, which is again one of those tyrosine kinase oral inhibitors. It's a standard of care in kidney cancer. This is phase 2, so we're at the second stage. And what this experimental drug is it's called a HIF2 alpha inhibitor. So what does that mean? So HIF2 alpha, we're going to talk a little bit more about later, but essentially it's a protein that is overexpressed in several cancers that we believe promotes tumor growth. So it's called the hypoxia-inducible factor. So anytime the cancer is starved of oxygen, it does various things to grow because it wants to continue to grow as the cancer. And so what this HIF2 alpha is, it allows that to go on. So by blocking that process, we believe that we are blocking and decreasing the tumor growth. And then again, we're giving that in with what's standard of care now, which is the cabozantinib. So again, we're looking at overall how patients are responding, how long they're responding for, and how long it takes to have a response. Patients to enroll in this study have to have either a locally advanced or a metastatic renal cell cancer. Again, performance status. And we're currently enrolling in 2 different cohorts. So we're patients who have no prior treatments, or they've received treatment with immunotherapy, but no more than 2 treatments. So that means you can't be in your third or fourth line and beyond. And then again, I put up the websites of where you can find this. So this next study is, we have several studies in this adenosine pathway, which I'll talk a little bit about. So this is CPI 006 is the study drug, and we're looking at this by itself or in combination with another medicine that also targets the same pathway, or Pembro, which is another immunotherapy. So this is phase 1, so this is the beginning. This is a new drug being looked at. And so what the adenosine pathway is essentially, you may have heard in your early biology ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. So ATP is the energy of the cell, right? And so what that does is that, what the adenosine pathway is it goes from ATP to AMP to, or ADP to AMP to adenosine. And what we believe and what we've studied and seen in the tumors is that high levels of adenosine lead to more tumor growth. It promotes tumor growth. It promotes the tumor to evade the immune system. So we believe that by blocking this adenosine pathway, we are decreasing the tumor growth and allowing the immune system to see the tumor to attack. So the CPI 006 is an intravenous medication, so through the vein. And it's a monoclonal antibody, so similar to what we're seeing with other immunotherapies. And it's acting on this CD73, which is basically the step from going from AMP to adenosine, so we're blocking that step. I always say this name wrong, so I'm not even gonna try, is the oral medication that's also in the adenosine pathway. This is also a checkpoint, so this one is blocking the receptor. So we're blocking the conversion, and then we're blocking where it can connect in the tumor. So it's two ways of blocking the same pathway. And then we're combining that again with immunotherapy. So again, we're trying to take off the brake. We're trying to show the tumor to the immune system, and then we're trying to take off the brakes so that the immune system can attack. Again, we're looking at toxicity. This is a phase 1 trial, so the primary outcomes are actually a little different than what we've previously talked about on different studies. So this one being phase 1 is we're looking at the toxicities and we're looking at the safety in combination and however it's given on whatever arm you would be in. And then I did briefly just because of phase 1. So this one, again, performance status. Again, you have to have measurable disease. Again, you can have 1 but no more than 5 prior lines of therapy. And then I put this one in as the exclusion, but I should mention that most studies, if you're thinking about going on a study, anything that's involving an immunotherapy, or one of these monoclonal, like the pembrolizumab or the nivolumab, generally speaking, if you have an HIV infection or an autoimmune disease that requires immunosuppressive medications like steroids, that's generally an exclusionary feature. Okay, so next we're again in phase 1 still, and we're still targeting that adenosine pathway. And again, we're now combining it with a different immunotherapy with atezolizumab, which is another, we have lots of research has come up with all these different monoclonal antibodies that block this PD-1, PD-L1 pathway, which is because of clinical trials and patients going on clinical trials. And so we have several of these to test. So atezo is one of them. And again, we're blocking that adenosine pathway. Again, this is phase 1, so we're measuring toxicities, and we're looking at response rate because we do want to collect that information during these trials as well. So we're doing imaging and looking at how patients' disease is affected. And so again, these are inclusions if you're interested, 1 to 2 prior lines of therapies, refractory to, and then again, these exclusion from any of these immunotype of studies is usually hypersensitivity to monoclonals or immunodeficiency or autoimmune things that require high doses of immune suppression. The TTX-030, this is another phase 1 study. This is a single agent or in combination again with immunotherapy. This medicine again is another blocking a different part of that adenosine pathway we talked about. So this is an antibody that inhibits CD39. So it's a different step that we're hitting. And the reason we're testing all this is we really believe that there's a lot of promise to blocking this pathway. And so we're developing multiple different medications to look at what part of the pathway is best to block do we need to combine the medicines together? And so that's why we have several studies of a similar med. And so again, this is a accumulation of ATP is pro-inflammatory. So accumulation means that the tumor is, adenosine means that the tumor is going to hide from the immune system. Again, we're looking at doses here and outcome. Inclusion, you have to have an advanced, this is not just for renal cell, this is so multiple advanced tumors. And then you have to have measurable disease, and again, what we mentioned, and I gave you the websites to look to. So pexevec is a exciting one too for me. A lot of the research I've done with Dr. Mershon has been in oncolytic viral therapy. So this is a phase 1b study, so it's phase 1, which is looking at pexevec, which is actually what we call oncolytic viral therapy. So what does that mean? That means that we're taking viruses that can, don't normally cause significant symptoms in people. This particular one is a vaccinia virus, so, they're manipulating the virus so that it doesn't cause symptoms in you. It may cause some mild viral symptoms, but nothing shouldn't do, maybe a little low-grade fever or flu-like symptoms. And they're manipulating it to target specific to the cancer, and so the virus goes to the cancer cells, and it basically activates the immune response and has can actually have anti-cancer effects on its own, and brings the immune system with it to also attack the cancer. So it's genetically engineered to do that. So they manipulate the virus in the lab, and then we give it to the patients. We're doing this in combination with this REGN2810, which is another monoclonal antibody against that PD-L1. So it can be given alone, or it can be given in combination. And generally what we've seen with patients is that they may have, during the time of the infusion of the virus, they may have like low-grade viral symptoms. So fevers, muscle aches, things like that can occur. So again, this is confirmed metastatic renal cell cancer. And these patients, to go on this study, you can actually have had no prior lines of therapy, or you can have progressed on others, measurable disease and good function. And then the similar exclusion where you have no HIV, no autoimmune things that require immunosuppression. So now I just wanted to take a few minutes to touch on some of our patient experiences who've been on clinical trials. I'm not going to get too in detail of the patient information. We'll just briefly say this patient was a 65-year-old male who had metastatic renal cancer, had 2 prior lines of therapy, including tyrosine kinase inhibitors and immunotherapy with checkpoint inhibitors. This was a phase 1 Pelton study, so what this was is now our study's in phase 2 in combination with the HIF-2 blocker, but this was just with the HIF-2 alpha blocker that I talked about a few slides ago in one of those trials. So again, just to explain a little bit more about what that means, is that hypoxia means that there's not enough oxygen coming to the tissues. Oops. Okay. Which basically, we believe it contributes to the more aggressive phenotypes. We think that it increases resistance to chemotherapy, to radiation, and potentially can predict poorer outcomes. You adapt to the hypoxia by this hypoxia-inducible factor, which basically regulates how genes are upregulated in the tumor. So the genes get upregulated to do things to adapt to this process. They get what we call angiogenesis, which means they can grow blood vessels into the tumor and help the tumor grow. It can increase the rate that it grows, and it can increase the risk of it going somewhere else. So we do believe that blocking this pathway is we believe this pathway is an important driver of progression of kidney cancer, and blocking this pathway may be very, very beneficial in our future therapeutics. So that's the patient. So this first image I'll explain. So you can see this is the liver. This is an MRI, first of all. And these are lesions that you can see in the liver, all through here. The patient had multiple, this was a big one down here, and you can see all these multiple liver lesions. And this scan is prior to treatment, okay? the patient was enrolled on the trial, and now this scan is from August 2018, which was 5 months after starting therapy. And what I want to highlight here, again, it's hard to get these, they slice through, so as you scroll, so it's hard to get good cuts, but these blackened spots here, which may be difficult to see, there's some over here, and then I circled that big tumor. Remember I showed you that big tumor that was right here, is now this right here. So that's showing that blackening, and that is that the tumor is becoming what we call necrotic or dying. So this is a good and excellent response to the treatment. And now this is the patient now in February of 2020, and they're in complete response. So you don't see any of the liver, you saw all of those abnormal mets there, and now you see nothing. And doing very, very well. This one was with the HIF2 alpha blocker. Okay. And then the next one I want to highlight is with the pexevec, the viral study. So this is, again, a phase 1 study. So again, without getting into too much detail about the patient, this was a 64-year-old male who had metastatic renal cell cancer. This was initially diagnosed in 2015. They were treated with surgery, with multiple, had a nephrectomy, had a recurrence in the lung that was treated surgically, and then had recurrence in the mesenteric and omental means the abdomen. Treated with 2 lines of tyrosine kinase inhibitors, so 2 of the PO of the oral medicines, and unfortunately had intolerable side effects to those. Developed a lot of high blood pressure and things that could not continue. So was enrolled in October of 2018. So what I want to highlight again, this is now a CT scan, and again, this is prior to treatment. So again, you can see this big lesion here. You can see how all along the side of the liver, all of this nodularity. You can see it on this scan as well. As we get further down into the abdomen, you can see all these nodules along the side here, and all of this cancer that you see all through here. This is after 2 months of getting the virus and the immunotherapy. So, again, you can see that there's blackening and darkening of these tumors. Okay, again, that speaks to us that they're dying. That speaks of necrosis. And you can see that nodularity is starting to go away. And now this is the latest scan from, I think, also February, just came out, and you can see all of that stuff that you were seeing in the liver before is now gone. So basically, why join a clinical trial? It advances the field. Every medicine that you are currently receiving or will receive has at one point in time been on a clinical trial. This is how we advance the field. This is how we discover toxicities, new treatments, things that work, combinations of things. So your participation, not only potentially helps yourself, but helps all of the future patients and us move the field forward. And it allows for better outcomes. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, myself and Dr. Jonczak are happy to answer.